Okay, we'll get started here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our cybersecurity webinar with Will Nobles from Vector Choice and myself and Angie Reese from Accurate Protections. We're going to be covering the technology side of cybersecurity as well as the insurance side of cybersecurity. We're going to go in two sections here. First, I'm going to start off on the technology side, and then Angie will precede me and talking about the insurance protection that you would need. So let's get started here. Okay, guys. Again, my name is Will Nobles. I'm the founder and president of Vector Choice Technology Solutions, and we have Angie Reese, the owner of Accurate Protections. We're going to. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I have an associate's degree in technology, also a BS degree in technology. I started Vector Choice in 2008. We currently have 4 offices, or corporate offices, in Atlanta, Georgia. We have an office in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Eastern North Carolina. And then we just purchased a company in Chantilly, Virginia, where we serve Northern Virginia and the DC area. I've been in IT for 21 years. I came from a consulting firm doing consulting for Fortune 500 companies, Disney, Wachovia, Bank of America. I've got a lot of background in HIPAA, PCI compliance, ITAR, and SOX compliancy. So some of the things I'm going to cover today is number one security threat that threatens your business and where antivirus and firewalls is not enough anymore. And then also 15 things to protect you against cybersecurity. So ultimately what we want to accomplish here is where you're not a sitting duck when it comes to your technology or your insurance and how things are covered if you do get hit with ransomware or any kind of major virus attack. Okay, so a few stats. 1 in 5 small businesses suffer from breach each year. Most people think that I'm a small business, it's not going to happen to me. Hackers are going to go after you as a small business before they're going to go after the big guys. When you see things like Equifax getting hit, it takes several months and sometimes years to penetrate and hack that environment. And with multiple hackers versus a small business, it can take one teenager sitting in their basement to penetrate a small business. 81% of breaches happen to small and medium businesses. And you don't hear about that on the news, so never say it's not going to happen to you, because it will. And then also with the technology that I will be presenting today, 90% of the breaches could be prevented by implementing these types of technologies. And 52% of computer users have lost faith in antivirus. Antivirus is not enough today. There's antivirus, anti-malware, anti-ransomware. I'll go into that a little bit in depth, but antivirus does not get it anymore from protecting you from malware and cyber attacks. And 73% of companies that paid ransomware last year were attacked again. We've had customers ourselves that got hit with ransomware. And then sure enough, about 2 weeks later, they were hit again. So if you're hit once, you're definitely going to be likely, and you pay the ransom, you're definitely going to be hit again from that standpoint. So what does, I'm going to take a poll. It's going to pop up on your screen really quick. And what's the number one security threat when it comes to, over to this real fast. So I'm going to put a poll up and I want you guys to vote on it. I'm going to launch poll now. And what's the number one security threat to companies today? So if you guys could please vote on that. And I'll give it a few minutes to get everybody a chance to vote. Looks like we got about 66% votes in so far. Alrighty, so I'm going to end voting at this point. And you guys are mostly correct. I'm going to share the results here. Yes, employees is the number one threat to security in a company. As you guys see here, there's very valid points with hackers and vendors, but definitely employees is your number one risk when it comes to that. Alrighty, so I'm going to move on to the next one. And Logan, did you take over sharing?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so 3 steps to protecting your organization. Threat assessment. One of the things that we recommend, especially if you are any kind of compliancy, PCI, HIPAA, SOX, ITAR, the list can go on, is doing a threat assessment. One of the things that we can do, we can go into a company and actually assess their environment, our current customers as well as prospects, and look at that and see what we're able to find in the environment and be able to show you what the action plan to protect the environment. Step 2 is definitely taking action. Getting the threat assessment is good and it's nice, but if you don't do anything about it, you're definitely still open to issues. So definitely take action on that. And then ongoing maintenance. Don't forget to keep things updated. Don't let things get very old. Our recommendation, and I can share at a later time, a recommendation of when to replace firewalls and equipment and hardware and so forth. But make sure that your patching's done. Make sure that your antivirus, anti-malware is all up to date. Okay, so I'm going to cover a few things. The 15 ways to protect your business from a cyber attack. And go ahead and start with number 1, security assessment. Just to play off of that, security assessment. One of the things we do is the network security and a compliancy assessment. We produce a report to you. If you are mandated to do that quarterly or yearly with HIPAA and PCI, we can run that in real time for you, a constant monitoring, as well as yearly reviews to produce a report to the compliancies that you have to meet. Spam email. So a lot of people, you could use Gmail or any kind of Hotmail, Gmail. But if you're not, and even if you're on an Exchange server or Microsoft Exchange, you might not have spam email filtering. But protecting yourself against spam coming in your environment is also one of the 15 ways to protect your business. So make sure that you have a proper spam filtering service. If you are a customer of Vector Choice and you are in our email hosting environment, you do have spam email protection. But definitely check with your IT vendor if you need that. Passwords. Passwords is the big thing. Everybody says, I hate having so many passwords. I hate changing my passwords. And a few things with this. Number 1, have a password database. Like LastPass or some type of password database. Vector Choice just came out, and we are now offering a software that gives you a database ability to keep all your passwords in that database. It's encrypted. So come see me about that and talk to me about that when you're if you're interested. But definitely have your passwords. Don't name your password password1, even with a capital P or an @ sign for the A. Hackers know these little tricks. A lot of times I hear people say, well, I've got a password and it's password ! And the P is capitalized. That is one of the easiest passwords to hack. So definitely don't use your kids' names, your family names. Don't use your phone number to your office or your cell phone. Don't think by flipping the phone number backwards is going to help. Make sure you at least use 8 characters, uppercase, special characters. Try not to use phrases. If you use a phrase, make sure the phrase is very, very long with different, but we still don't suggest using phrases. We suggest honestly using a password database so you don't have to remember each individual password. Those database products can work on your iPhone, smartphones, as well as Google Chrome and your browser. Security awareness, educating your employees on what what is there and what type of risk. One of the things that we're getting ready to kick off at Vector, we're going to kick off a training on security awareness and dive deep into individual areas about security awareness for our customers to help educate, because again, employees are the #1 risk to a company. Clicking on emails, we see a lot where people get an email from the owner saying, hey, can you transfer wire $10,000 to this account for me? Well, it's not from the owner. So definitely understand what your owners or managers would actually send to you an email. If that does not look right, don't even click on it. If you're with Vector as an IT provider, please send it over to us for us to review, and we can block those types of things and make adjustments to protect you there. Advanced endpoint security. This goes into antivirus. Again, not having just antivirus is what you need anymore. You need antivirus, anti-malware, and anti-ransomware. They're all types of viruses, but they attack the machine at different levels and different needs. So definitely review your machines. Make sure antivirus is not the only thing that you're using from endpoint security for your computers. Multifactor authentication. People have probably heard of this and said, what does that really mean? Multifactor authentication means that it's two ways to log in. So you have a password to log into a website or a computer, and then you have to have a changing password. If you guys remember the days of working for big companies, and you had to carry around what was a little flob disk that the password changed every 60 seconds or so. That the new version of that now is Google Authenticate or Authy that works on iPhones or any kind of smartphone, and that gives you multi-factor authentication. Definitely see your software vendors to see if they have that. Please check with us to how to implement that from a computer standpoint. But multi-factor authentication, again, passwords are not enough these days. So two-factor authentication, getting into a website or a device is definitely needed as well. Computer updates. People say, well, I run my Windows updates every once in a while. One of the things that we do as if you're a customer of Vector, is we're running patch management from Windows updates, Java updates, Adobe updates, any of these types of updates that come out, especially security threat updates. That's how hackers penetrate your environment and your computers, and they're able to hack you a lot easier. So make sure your computers stay up to date is definitely key. Dark web search. A lot of people say, what is the dark web? You can look at a video of what the dark web is. If you go to vectorchoice.com and go to our services and dark web, and you see a video there. But the dark web is pretty much where everything illegal resides, and where when you hear about Equifax got hacked, all that information gets put on the dark web for sale. So they can sell your information for $10, $50, $100 based on the type of information. If it's credit cards, passwords, human trafficking is on the dark web, illegal guns, drugs. So a lot of things reside on the dark web. But the dark web, from a business standpoint, is really focused around the passwords and that information that can be stolen from your company. Log management. A lot of people come to us and say, I've got an employee that left. I want to see what they were doing on their machine the days leading up to that, and the days leading up to that, and we're not, by default, computers they do some logging, but not intense information. So log management is something that you would want to put in place on those devices, so we can actually see every change that was made during a particular time. So and so forth. And then this also helps us track if there was an attack on your environment from a cyber attack. We can look at the logs and manage that as well. But by default, if you are a Vector Managed Services customer, this is would not be included in the default Managed Services package. Web gateway security. That's really firewall and URL filtering. So having a proper firewall in place, but this part I'll talk about the URL filtering and blocking websites. So we use, depending on the firewall that you implement or what's called Cisco Umbrella, that gives the ability for us to block websites based on your requirements. If you want to block social media, gambling, pornography, guns, religion, there's different sections that we can block on your request and block those. And what that helps is prevents the users from getting an email, clicking on a link, and going to a website that is not healthy for the environment in one way or the other. Mobile device security is really if you own, if your employee owns the mobile device, we can actually put software on it where we can track. If you guys remember the days of Blackberries, where the Blackberries had to have a server and the data can be automatically removed, because you don't want an employee walking out with emails and information on their mobile device and everything. So we can put our software on there to prevent and make sure that the mobile device gets locked. You don't want to have an iPhone sitting there and some kid, a kid or family member gets hold of it and able to send emails on the company's behalf. So we can actually put measures on there to lock the phone at a certain amount of time, where we can remove emails or the email service from employees of the phone and so forth. Firewalls. If you have Comcast or Charter or any kind of internet provider, and they tell you that their modem is your firewall, that is not true. It has some firewall capability, but it does not secure you from everything that you need, and from an enterprise firewall if you're a business. So definitely having a firewall in place and blocking traffic inbound to keep bad guys out, but also blocking traffic outbound to make sure that only, and a little technical, only ports that are open that is needed to talk outbound is open. So you can protect your business in both directions with a firewall, inbound and outbound. And encryption, that's from email encryption to computer encryption. If you have laptops with data that you're walking around and you leave it at the airport, think about the risks that you have with the data that you have on there for your business. If that laptop's not encrypted, it's easy just to take a hard drive out and pull that data off of that laptop if it's stolen or lost. So encrypting that device, you're required by PCI and HIPAA to make sure that's encrypted from that standpoint. But I encourage anybody that is, especially with laptops that are carrying information around about your business, to have encryption on that machine. So you can, once you do, if you ever lose that machine, you don't have to worry about it. Yes, you're out of that machine, but you don't have to worry about anybody stealing that data because all that data is encrypted at that point. And I do apologize, these allergies are killing me these days. And backups, you want to make sure your computers are backed up if you're storing any data on the computers as well as your servers. And you don't want your internet, your IT guy or your managed services company to tell you, yep, we have backups. You want them to be able to show proof that they are backing up your environment and are they monitoring that. One of the things that we do at Vector, we have a backup board, just like you guys submit tickets. We have a backup board that notifies us every night when backups are completed. We have someone that reviews that and makes sure that all backups are completed successfully each night. So you definitely want to make sure that your IT company is definitely making sure, not just backing up, but make sure the backups are successful. And cyber insurance. So I'm going to lead into Angie's part of the business, but if having all of those things in place is great, but does not stop, like I said before, it stops 97% of the issues. So definitely having cyber insurance in place is a key. From an IT standpoint, we only can do but so much because attacks and hackers change and are evolving every single day. so it's a constant battle to keep up. So having that insurance policy is definitely key to have. So I'm going to roll into another poll here. And before I roll into the other poll, one of the things for everybody on the call today, we will be doing a free dark web scan. And what that does, it will look and see if any of on your domain, so if it's vectorchoice.com, we're going to run a scan on that, and we'll be able to see if any of your passwords are on the dark web, and we will produce that report to you guys shortly later tomorrow. All right, so if you need to contact me or have any questions, I'm going to do a Q&A here in a second. And also, so you guys know, there is a Q&A section that you can click on and ask questions. I'm going to go and answer the questions that have came up, but if you need us for anything, there's our 1-800 number you can call, and there's my email address, wnobles@vectorchoice.com. So let me get to a few of these questions here. No, there's no questions. Let's see. All right, so does anybody have any questions? If you want to use the Q&A down at the bottom, if you have any questions, I can go and answer those. So I'll give a few minutes, a few seconds here to see if anybody has any questions about that. If not, I'm going to move on. Okay, so I've got one question. Do you have different security settings if we travel outside the United States? No, there's not a different type of settings. We definitely recommend, if you're traveling anywhere, to have encryption on your machine, have backup on that machine to make sure that if there's any data that is changed while you're gone, it's backed up. Long as you're on the internet, no matter where you're setting, we can actually access your environment and your computer remotely. And so we can do the patching and everything. If you're a customer of ours, we can do the patching for that. But definitely have encryption on the machine and backups on the machine. All right, Brent, safe to use Google Prompt? No, never use anything that, and the question is it safe to use a Google Prompt to save your password? No, it's not. That saves the password in clear text. So if I could hop on your machine right now or hack into your machine, and then I would have all your passwords that you've ever typed into Google Chrome or IE, anything that pops up and says save password, that it saves it in clear text. And what that means is I can look in the computer and actually see your password, and I can take and go to your banking account and log in as you to your banking account. So yes, I never use that. Thank you, George. And then William has what is a good mobile phone encryption app? So I can only say what we provide. So we provide a software called Beachhead, and it's funny that one of my encryption processes is running right now. So we provide a software called Beachhead to our customers, and that works on the computer as well as the mobile device. And the good thing about that is we can actually geo-track your device. If you lose it, we can actually pinpoint it and pass it on to the cops, or say if it's stolen, pass it on to the cops, and they can pinpoint the exactly location of that device. Mike Reynolds, what anti-malware blocking apps are you seeing top tier related to ransomware encryption attacks? There's, Mike, that's a longer answer to that. What I'll do is I'll take that offline and answer that to you later and get that back to you. Jordan, can you please, Jordan Russ, can you please go over the password guidelines part again really quick? Yeah, sure. So our recommendation is at least 8 characters in length. More is better. Going up to 14 is getting to the extreme, but at least 8 or 12, 8 at the minimum. At least uppercase, special characters and numbers within your password is definitely a good way to handle passwords. Charles, speaking of autofill for passwords in Google Chrome, any way to permit or disable that? Yes. If you're on a domain controller or part of a domain, you can do that through group policy. If you're part of our monitoring system, and you're not on the domain, we can actually disable that as well for you at a global level. And then, is it okay if we use iPhones to check our work emails? Yes, it is okay to use iPhones to check your work emails. And that's not a problem at all. The risk that you have is if your phone gets stolen and you don't have a password on it, your work emails are exposed to whoever stole that, and they can send it. So definitely, if you're a customer of ours, notifying us and so we can disable that phone from authenticating to our mail server. Okay, guys, I hope I answered everybody's question. Ted. See, Ted's asked a question. Will, would you recommend a VPN subscription? I've been hearing a lot of ads for technology and not sure whether or not it's the right solution for laptop phones, etc. So VPNs, and Ted, I hope I fully understand the question. But VPNs are used different ways. Site-to-site VPNs between locations, and then also remote VPNs where you're actually VPN into your environment. So I would have, Ted, what I'll do is I'll take that offline and answer that question, see exactly what you're looking for, and answer that question offline. Teresa, is Keychain on Mac safe to keep all passwords? Yeah, Keychain is great. It does encrypt your passwords, so that with the Mac that's not a problem. I don't know if and because I'm not a Mac person, my guys are. If Keychain stores that on the web where you can access it remotely if you lose that machine. But if that's the case, yes, I think Keychain would be fine for that. All right, guys, for sake of time, I'm going to turn this over to Angie. I'm going to start real quick with a poll for Angie, and I'm going to get you guys to answer that real quick if you don't mind. So I'm going to launch the poll now before she starts. So if you guys can answer these questions. Did everybody fall asleep on me? There we go. Alrighty, so I'm going to give a few more minutes. In the meantime, Dennis, I know that you raised your hand earlier. For sake of time, I do apologize I didn't get to you, but I can get to you offline. All right, I'll give about another 30 seconds and we'll end the poll. And while we're waiting on this, guys, as well, we're going to be doing some more cybersecurity webinars covering different topics when it comes to cybersecurity. So be on the lookout for that. And then again, I'll be starting doing some tech tips, webinar tech tips and so forth. So I'm going to end the poll here, and I'm going to share the results here. So it looks like quite a few guys don't have cybersecurity insurance. And Angie, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
That sounds great. Thanks a lot, Will. I mean, it's pretty interesting to look at the poll where the majority of you have not had a discussion with your insurance agent. I'm making an assumption that your insurance agent has probably not broached the subject with you. I'm not surprised at all to see the comfort level being at a 1. I would have completely expected that. So It's kind of interesting when you look at the news. Every single day it seems like we're seeing a new hack or hearing about a new hack happening to a company. And what we hear about in the news are large hacks like Home Depot, Target, Equifax that was just hacked. But small businesses are typically much more vulnerable to cyber attacks than a large business is. In fact, research has shown statistically that 1 in 6 small businesses have been hacked in the past. So the question is not if, but when. So what I'd like to ask you is, do you think you're at risk? And when you're looking at hacks, 52% of all hacks involve malicious or criminal attacks. But the scary thing is the other 48% involve your own employees, which is really challenging to protect yourself against. You have things like phishing emails, passwords, either reusing them too much, leaving them in plain sight, leaving mobile devices in your vehicle for theft purposes. And a really big one is not keeping your patches up to date on your systems. And statistically, when a small business is hacked, 60% of the time they actually do go out of business within 6 months. And then another very scary statistic is that your system has typically been breached for 206 days prior to you ever finding out about it. When I speak to companies about cyber liability coverages, I always hear the same 5 to 6 things as to why they're not purchasing cyber liability. And I'd like to delve into those a little bit. The number one thing is I trust my employees, which is great. I hope all businesses do. But when you look back to that last slide, intentional acts and mistakes account for almost half of the breaches. And a really alarming statistic to think about is that if a hacker sends out 10 phishing emails to a company, 1 out of those 10 emails will be opened and the link will be clicked on. That's a 90% success rate, which explains why phishing is one of the most popular methods for hacking today. The next one, my security software will protect me. When a company is compromised, statistically, when we're talking a small business, 60% of the time it took 1 minute for the hacker to access that business. When I talked about the last slide, security patches being up to date is one of about 24% of what hacks attribute to. You've heard of the Equifax hack. I don't know how many of you realize that the Equifax hack was actually due to a patch not being installed. And this week, the Massachusetts Attorney General actually suggested that Equifax broke the law when it failed to run the security patch before they were breached in September. And that was just made public on Wednesday, that a judge is refusing to let the credit reporting firm dismiss the case, which is what they've been trying to do. The next one, I don't have anything worth taking. What a lot of small business owners don't realize is that when you're hacked and you're small, it's not personal and they were not coming after your company. It's simply the law of large numbers. When you think of robocalling, companies put phone numbers on a computer. The computer keeps dialing until they hit a live voice. The identical thing happens for hacking. Hackers load IP addresses into hacking software, and then that software goes to work. All it's doing is cycling through those IP addresses until it has a vulnerability. It hits, and then you've been hacked. It's completely anonymous. In fact, if you want to learn how to do it, it'll take you about 12 minutes. You can go to the internet, download an app to access the dark net. When you're on the dark net, you buy hacking software, and then you launch the software. And it's about a total of 12 minutes. If that's too much trouble, you can get on the dark net after you've downloaded the app and just hire somebody else to do it for you. Kind of a scary thought. Supply chain is another one that I hear quite a bit. And when you think about it, you're really only as strong as your weakest link. I'd be curious if you think to yourself, how many of you have asked your payroll company, your merchant processor, your IT provider, or your insurance broker if they have a cyber liability policy? And if you have, I give you a lot of credit. How many of you have a certificate to actually show proof of what that coverage entails? The next one I hear at this point, probably 99% of the time, and it's the fact that the company is hosting their information in the cloud. I think most of us do nowadays. I think it's uncommon to run across a company that doesn't use the cloud to some extent for their business information. The problem is that really leaves a back door, because you know your own system and have confidence, I'm assuming, in your own system, but you have no idea what that cloud provider is doing from a standpoint of protecting their system, and you've just left a back door open to your entire system. Statistically, the scary thing is there's only 5 major cloud providers. If one of those 5 major providers had a hack that lasted 3 to 6 days, it could potentially amount to $15 billion in loss. And I can tell you not one cloud provider is insured for that amount. It's really going to be catastrophic if that ever does happen. And so we really do encourage businesses to take the lead and protect their own company in the event that does happen. And then I'm going to give you a bonus one, because I've been hearing this more and more lately. It's their personal information of the CEO or the CFO that I've been speaking with was hacked. Maybe they had a credit card stolen in one of the retail hacks that we hear about. It's data breach fatigue. When you're hacked yourself personally, it's a phone call to the bank or the phone call to your credit card processor to get everything taken care of. And it's relatively easy, just a little bit of time out of your day. Unfortunately, they tend to then think that that is how a hack will affect their business. What I'd like to do is run you through a scenario of what a potential breach could look like with a company that does have a standalone cyber liability policy. So if we look at this scenario, the hackers gained access to a company's server. That company has 75 employees, 2,000 customers, 1,000 prospects, and 1 vendor that they contain information on that would be personally identifiable. The hacker's now holding the entire database for ransom, which means this company is down and out. They're no longer conducting business while this is happening. Fortunately, this company has a standalone cyber liability policy, so their first phone call is to their insurance carrier and their broker to notify them of the breach. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, once the carrier has been notified that there's a potential breach, how the policy starts responding. The first thing that happens, it's a coverage called privacy notification and crisis management expense. And for this type of coverage, think of it like your car insurance, how you have medical coverage and medical coverage pays out even if you're not negligible. This type of coverage does the same thing. It's considered loss containment coverage. It's probably the most important coverage you can purchase on your cyber liability. And it's because it provides you with the experts who handle breaches day in and day out. They know what they're doing, and they take over for you and side by side walk you through how to do everything. They hold your hand. The next one, people are surprised to find out that public relation companies are typically the second phone call in the event of a breach. The reason being is the clock starts ticking of how you have to notify, who you have to notify, and the message that you're going to put out. The PR company will actually craft a message so that when your customers, your prospects, the general public, the news media, even your own employees want to find out what's going on, it's a PR firm that's assisting you with that. And then data breach notifications. How do you even know who to notify? You may have 2,000 customers, but maybe only 500 of them got breached, and you don't want to tell your entire database about it. Your credit card processor, your employees. And then to think about that, the government regulators, which we'll get a little bit more into that in a couple more slides. A call center. I'm sure you can imagine if you're hacked, the amount of calls that you will have coming into your company would really be catastrophic. They actually open up a call center to handle all of the incoming phone calls and communication so that your company can still attempt to go about business, and they're handling that workload for you. The next one is the most expensive part of any breach. It sometimes will surpass a lawsuit unless you're talking about a large breach. But if you're talking about a small company, this is typically the most expensive part, and it's forensic experts. The forensic experts are going to be called in to determine the cause of the breach. It's not inexpensive. The average hourly rate for a forensic expert is about $500 to $650. And unfortunately, that's not an optional thing for you to do. If you take credit cards and process them, look at your merchant processor contract. They will have a requirement in there that in the event of a breach, you are required to have forensic monitoring done. And then the last piece of this coverage is credit and identity monitoring, which I'm sure several of you have done on this call just because you've probably had a breach in one of the famous retail ones that we hear about. The second coverage is regulatory defense and penalties. So this covers fines and penalties that deal with government regulators, not customers or the general public. This is especially valuable when you have multiple government regulators that become involved in your breach. I'm going to run through these quickly. GDPR, I'm going to get into at the very end of the slide if we have time. That's General Data Protection Regulation. That's the EU that's regulating how data is protected for their citizens. The deadline for compliance on that is looming. It's May 25th, so we're talking just a few weeks away. HIPAA, you're probably saying to yourself, I don't have anything to do with health insurance. I'm not a hospital. I'm not a doctor's office. If you have employees and you offer health benefits, you now have HIPAA compliant information that you have to deal with. PCI Security Standards Council, that's one of the more interesting ones. When I bring that coverage up to clients, the first thing out of their mouth is we're PCI compliant. I'm not concerned about it. A few months ago, I went and saw the Office of Civil Rights speak at a cyber conference. Believe it or not, that's the government regulator that comes in if there's a HIPAA or high-tech breach. And they specifically said if you've been breached, they do not consider you to be PCI compliant any longer, and they will impose fines and penalties for PCI non-compliance. Their comment was exactly, if you're PCI compliant, you would have never had a breach. So that's the government's view of it. I'm just going to go down to one more that I find extremely interesting. The 50 state breach laws that you see on the very last line there, that's really changing. When I first started doing these webinars a few years ago, the states were in the low 40s. If I had done this webinar for you on March 27th, I would have had 49 state breach laws. However, Alabama just enacted state breach laws on March 28th. So now in addition to all the government regulators, you've got 50 states, District of Columbia, Guam, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and the EU. And I know you might be saying to yourself, some of you on this call, I'm a Georgia domiciled company. All of my customers are in the state of Georgia. However, you may have customers giving you credit cards that reside in other states, or worse yet, European citizens. If you take a credit card from somebody in another state, you now have to abide by those states as well and inform those states. The next coverage that comes into play is information security and privacy liability. This is what provides you with the coverage for lawsuits in the event of a breach. It pays your defense, your damages, your judgments, and your settlements. The next one is business interruption. So again, remember in this scenario, this company was not able to operate their business due to the breach. This coverage is really crucial for a small business because it will pay the income that you would have had coming in if it had not been for the breach. The next expense goes hand in hand with business interruption. It's called extra expense. So this coverage provides you with expenses that you would not have ordinarily incurred if the breach had not happened. And you think of something like staffing, or maybe setting up a temp website, or maybe having another manufacturer assist you with product production because maybe your line was what was hacked, not your website. Having these two coverages is really crucial because on our end, when we're seeing claims settled, if the carrier is paying lost income and extra expense, you will always be moved to the top of the claim stack and they'll handle your claim for everybody else because they want to quit incurring those extra expenses. The next one is data asset recovery, just exactly as it sounds. In the event that they're not able to recover your information, they will work to recreate your information and get you back up in business. Cyber extortion. This is a really important coverage. This actually pays for a ransom negotiator. Believe it or not, having an expert at a carrier that handles ransom negotiations literally on a daily basis is priceless. They not only will pay the extortion demand on your behalf, which believe it or not, they do always pay. They'll protect your website from future ransom demands. And now there's a new thing that we're seeing happening in the industry where a few of the carriers, and it's a very small amount, will not just restore your system to pre-loss, but they'll actually make improvements so that in the future, you're not having a breach happen. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of what a breach looks like with a company that has insurance. There's a lot more details involved and there's a lot more coverages and nuances that come into play, but I think it kind of gives you a quick glimpse into what it would look like. And depending on the size of your company, there's other services that you should expect with your policy. And I'll kind of go through these quickly. Helpline. A helpline is there pre-breach. So before anything happens, you can typically get like a 30-minute to an hour phone call to go over policies and procedures and see where you can tighten up. The helpline, in conjunction with the information portal, is there for a client in the event of a breach so that they always have access to up-to-the-minute information. Active avoidance, this is typically going to be with a little bit larger companies. What active avoidance is working with you in advance to thwart hacks from happening. And the analogy I give you is, think of it, if we're going to insure your building, it would be like talking to you about installing a sprinkler system so that we can avoid the potential damage that would ensue from a fire. Pre-breach planning services, this is exactly how it sounds. It's assisting you with putting a disaster recovery plan in place. And that sounds kind of easy, but before you can put a disaster recovery plan in place, you have to define what type of data you have, where is your data housed, how do you process your data, how does your data flow, where does it flow, and what third-party vendors, such as a cloud provider, do you have in place? And then you're drilling down on what protections do they have in place so that you really do understand not just your systems, but the backdoor that you've allowed into your systems. Employee training, this is another big one. If you think back to the phishing emails, when I talk about statistically, if your company has sent 10 phishing emails, there's a 90% probability that one of those emails will be open. Shunning Services, this is a really interesting one. If you haven't heard of this before, this is a denial of access. So they've got an IP address that they think is causing a potential hack situation. They'll block that IP address so that it stops the bleed. The problem with this can also be is that hackers will actually do denial of service. So then you have a company that is doing shunning services to stop the IP addresses, but at the same time, they can be stopping their legitimate users and their own client base from accessing their systems. So this one, they really have to be careful when they're talking about shunning services. And then I'd like to talk about, if you have a policy in place, if you're shopping for a policy, if you have interest in it, the really scary thing is this industry is relatively new and it's still growing and learning, and it's really trying hard to keep up with what's happening so that we can provide accurate coverage. But unfortunately, we're still typically behind when something major happens. Policies are changing to adapt. One of the easiest ways to show you this is looking at policy names. Cyber Edge, Cyber Risk, Cybersecurity. I could literally type out a single space line of policy different type names that I see. The challenge with that is just because it has a different name on the policy doesn't mean they're the same. A lot of the cyber policies, if you have a standalone policy, are about 100 to 125 pages. They can even be much longer. When you're looking at a cyber policy, you and most likely your agent are only looking at 3 to 4 pages of the policy where they talk about the coverage limits. But I can tell you those other 97 to 100 pages is what I get into, because that's the details. That's what's going to tell you, are you covered or are you not covered in the event of a claim? So let's look at the details of just a few of the highlights that are on those other pages that are really crucial to pay attention to. The first one is definitions. You can have a policy that will have anywhere from 2 pages to 6 or 7 pages of policy definitions. Why it's really important to understand those is because those definitions are what triggers a claim. When you don't have a standalone policy, you might have like Hartford Travelers Liberty, where they've added some cyber coverage into your policy. It's pretty common when it's an added coverage or just not a sophisticated carrier or an older policy that the definition of breach is only triggered if a governing body declares that your company had a breach. How long is that going to take? And do you really want to be dealing with a governing body when you would much rather your insurance carrier be doing that on your behalf? That's a pretty dangerous definition to have. I do see that periodically. The other one is, in order for a breach to be triggered, was information actually not just accessed but stolen? That's another common one I see. The best definition is just that your system was accessed. Nothing has to happen, nothing has to be stolen. It's the broadest definition that we can get. Sublimits. This is another big one. You might buy a $5 million cyber liability policy and be comfortable with those limits and feel good about the protection. However, having sub-limits is very common and on almost every single policy I see now. One of the most common sub-limits is for phishing, and it's because phishing is so prevalent. It's common that I see a sub-limit of $25,000, $50,000, $250,000 where you have a $5 million policy, but one of your biggest risks doesn't have $5 million in coverage. It's also common to see no coverage at all for that. Duty to defend is another big one because it broadens your coverage and it requires that the carrier defend you from the entire claim, not just what the policy covered. Retroactive date, there's been a lot of changes in this in the last couple of years. Retroactive date, you can get a policy that will cover hacks that may have happened in your system that you're not even aware of before your policy even starts. Why that's important is go back to that 206-day timeline. You could have already had a breach in your system you know nothing about. You put a policy in place today, and if you have no retroactive date with full prior acts coverage, you'll have coverage for that hack. That's absolutely crucial. So we've talked about what to look for. We've talked about coverages. In my world, what's excluded and what's limited is in small print, and it's not where you're typically looking, and that's actually the most crucial. I'm just going to run through a couple of these. Phishing, we've talked about. That's a big one. PCI, we've talked about. PCI compliance is not on all cyber policies. Typically, it's either carved back or it's done by endorsement. Some of the really good carriers will have it in their standard coverage form. However, they'll also have system requirements. They won't just cover PCI blanket. They require you to have particular IT, policies and procedures in place before they'll provide it. Regulatory fees, that's another one where carriers can really find themselves getting out of having to pay some fines and investigations if your policy is not written correctly. Theft of personal funds, this is a brand new one that I've just started seeing recently, and this comes into play for owners and officers of companies. So if their bank account was hacked personally, they actually can get coverage for this on their business policy. Dishonest and fraudulent acts. Most policies cover rogue employees, but not if that rogue employee acted in accordance with an officer or an executive knowledge. And then one of the big ones is transfer of funds. If you're handling wire transfers at all, a lot of the policies will cover that, but what you may not realize is they're going to have very strict requirements as to policies and procedures that you have to have in place and be following, and if you're not, they will void the coverage in the event of a claim. So that brings me to, if you have a policy or if you're looking at a policy, are you putting your coverage at risk and you don't even know it? So I want to go into the three big things that can put your coverage at risk without even realizing it. The first one is your application. When you fill out an application for cyber liability, that application becomes a part of the policy. So if you've made an error or a misstatement, it can void your coverage. I do have a couple of carriers that only ask 3 to 4 questions for certain types of companies. It goes a long way in making sure that we don't have an error on an application that the insured is regretting later. Backup requirements, Will touched on that. They'll have backup requirements. How often are you required to back up, and are you actually doing it? If you're not, again, that can void requirements. And also security standards. Let's say you've got Vector protecting you today, you've got cyber liability, you filled out the application based on what they were doing for you. In another 2 years, you've dropped them as your IT provider, but you still have that same policy. If you're not still doing everything that Vector was doing for you and you've put it on your application, that can void coverage. I can tell you there's a really famous lawsuit that's been going on since October of 2013. There's Cottage Health Systems had a breach in their systems where 32,500 of their clients' information was exposed publicly on the internet. The carrier was quoted as saying, "We don't cover stupid." They've been in litigation with them ever since because what Cottage Health Industries said that they were doing from a security standpoint on their application, they were not actually doing in real life. So those are some very easy ways that you can have cyber liability coverage and you don't even know that you voided it by your actions. I'd like to quickly look at, do you really need the coverage? And I'd like to just point out a couple of things here. Again, if you're taking credit cards, I have not seen a contract yet where the credit card processor did not put the onus on the company that it's their responsibility in the event of a breach. And in fact, regulators it's already gone through court that it's the company who collects, holds, and owns the information that's ultimately responsible in the event of a breach. And then the other one I'd really like to point out is if you work in a regulated industry, if you have anything to do with healthcare or financial, regulators can be financially devastating with what they're going to do as far as how much time they take, the fines and the penalties that they impose. So I think the challenging question that you have to ask yourself is if the media or the government regulators or your own employees or your customers came to you asking questions, would you be prepared to answer these questions? I just want to look at a couple of these. The ones in bold are what I highlighted. One of the big ones, though, is how do you notify and who do you notify as far as government regulators in the event of a breach? Believe it or not, there are some states that say you have to wait before you can notify. So you can't just pick one. You have to know what every single state is requiring. And then a regulator will never tell you shouldn't have had a breach. What they're going to do is tell you that you should have had policies and procedures that respond in the event of a breach, and that's where your penalties and fines are going to come into. So where I want to take it from that is, again, I've talked about cyber still a developing risk, and I want to leave you with kind of a closing thought. There's two interesting studies that were done in 2017, and one was done by Advisen and Partner RE. They actually posed insurance brokers, so people in my own industry. 62% of brokers felt that it was hard to compare carrier policies with each other. 44% of the agents actually thought that cyber property should be covered underneath a standard general liability property policy and not a cyber liability property policy. That may not mean anything to you, but what that tells me is agents and brokers still do not understand cyber liability, and they do not understand how to properly protect their clients, and they're leaving their clients with possibly a false sense of security. The other study that I found very interesting was done by J.D. Power and RIMS. This went to risk professionals that work in these companies and asked them how confident they were about the understanding of their cyber policies, and they found that there was a big lack of understanding and just a big lack of confidence with respect to risk managers and understand their policies. I want to leave you with one other thing, and then we'll go to questions. GDPR, again, you might think that you don't have to comply with it, but if you have any clients, if you've taken any credit card from a citizen that is European, and you'd be surprised how often that happens. If you have a transitory business like a restaurant, you have until May 25th of this year to put policies and procedures in place to be GDPR compliant. I can help you with that. I know also Vector can help you with that. So reach out to one of us and we can tell you a little bit more about that. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Will.
Sure. So guys, if you guys have any questions for Angie, Angie, I do have a question, and this sort of pertains to me and my customers on the phone. If I have cyber insurance and I'm hosting their data, do they still need to have cyber liability insurance?
You know, that's a really good question, Will. You've got third-party coverage and first-party coverage. So you're protected if you were breached, if one of your clients has a breach, and the forensics determines that it's because of your systems, then your client would be relying on your policy. But if that forensic company is called in and they're determining that it's your client's systems that are at fault, it's now not your responsibility, it's your client's responsibility. So yeah, they would want to have their own cyber liability policy in place.
Okay. Debbie asked the question, may we get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation today? Debbie, we can hand both of those out upon request. If you just shoot me an email, and I will get those over to you. And see, Jake asked, could we go into the theft and personal funds a little more?
You know, that's really new. I have only had probably the past 4 policies that I've written have that coverage. There's a couple of carriers that I write with that utilize that on their forms. It's very rare to find. So what happens as a business owner, let's say you woke up Monday morning, checked your bank account was completely empty, it's been hacked. You can actually put a claim into your insurance provider, your cyber liability policy for your own company, to find coverage for that if your agent has put the coverage in place on your policy.
Okay, and then we had a question. Will this be? Is this recorded? Yes, this is going to be recorded and will be posted up. And then we had another question. How do we get checked out? Check this out on the dark web. We will be posting. We'll look at everybody that's in the webinar, and we will be doing that dark web scan and sending you the report by end of the day tomorrow.
I can tell you that dark web scan is pretty interesting too. Will did it on me, and he did find a couple of minor things, so it made me feel better.
And then Carter, you asked a question earlier about, and I'm assuming you might still be on, about email spoofing. And the question was, if you get an email from you or someone in your company, but they did not send it, does that mean they've got access to your account? No, that does not mean they have access to your email. It is always advised if that happens to change your password, but it could be that the email was spoofed. And one of the things that we can do is there's on your hosting, it's called SPF records, and we lock it down to only make sure your location from a printer or scanner can send as your domain name or your mail server.
And then I see, Dan, you have a question about, does cyber liability cover litigation your customers may pursue due to a breach? Yes, it does. It's actually the information security and privacy liability. It's first party coverage. And that's going to pay for your defense costs, for damages, for judgments, for settlements, depending on how your policy is written. Hopefully it's written where the carrier comes in with their own law firm and defends you. Sometimes you'll see policies where you're required to hire your own attorney and spend your own time, but they will pay for it. So it does. It's just dependent on how your policy provides that coverage.
And William, you raised your hand. William Berry, you raised your hand earlier. I'm going to see if you're still here. I'll put you to allow to talk, and then. So William, if you can hear me, if you're still there, I unmuted you, so you should be able to talk now.
He's muted.
Okay. Looks like he's still muted. Okay, Debbie, you raised your hand. Well, actually, William's unmuted now. William, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I was just saying, Mr. Noble said, no, that was actually a mistake on my part. My fat fingers actually hit the raise hand button.
Okay, not a problem. Debbie, I'm gonna mute you, William, then, and Debbie, I'm gonna allow you to talk.
I'm taken care of.
Okay, all right, great. All right, guys, well, appreciate it. We're about 5 minutes over, so I do apologize for us running over a little bit. If you like this, definitely we'll be doing some more webinars on this and other items. So be looking for that, for those emails coming out in the next few months or so. And again, appreciate you joining, and we'll be sending you the dark web scan. And if you've got any questions for me or Angie, feel free to shoot us an email. Again, thanks guys, and everybody have a good rest of the day.